I only had 2 days to make this video, so let's just get this started. I'm way too tired for this. In this video, I'm going over every new character on the Chapter 14 banner, and I'm starting with Tianzun. He's based on a major Taoist deity of the same name who came into being at the beginning of everything and then created heaven and earth, thus giving him his name, Tianzun, which literally means the Lord of Heaven. He's thought to be eternal and limitless, without physical form and able to control the past. He also has a role in the book The Investiture of the Gods, a name you might recognize from the time I covered Hakumen. It's an interesting historical text that is basically like a mythological retelling of the fall of the Shang dynasty and rise of the Zhou dynasty. In the book, Tianzun sends out one of his disciples, Jiangxia, to help create the Zhou dynasty. It's a small role, but as they say, sometimes less is more. Now let's get into Tianzun's units. Remember, we're not covering 3 stars here because this video would take way too long. He's infinite attribute and gun type, and his skills are as follows. First is Hermit Parapi, Parapi being Japanese slang for party people, i.e. those who go clubbing a lot. He removes nourishment, unction, blessing, and regen while getting up to 5000 HP to himself at phase start and up to 300 when attacking. His second skill is Tetsutin Kyoshu, and I have no idea what that means. He gets increased vertical movement, applies protection to himself and allies in this range while giving tenacity to allies in this range at 90%. The third skill is Infinite Taoist. He resists all forced movement, applies weakness to hit units at 50%, and removes up to 2000 HP to enemies near the ones he hit in this range. Finally is Reiho Tenzon, whatever that means. After moving, he applies Blessing to adjacent allies at 90%, null debuff to self and adjacent allies at 60%, and whether he moves or not, he applies Anchor to allies in one square at 80%. Tianzun is definitely a support unit. He doesn't have a single thing that makes his damage worthwhile. However, he does have a slew of pretty good buffs. He can give protection, tenacity, ardor, blessing, and anchor, but he does want to move, which is a fair cost. Overall, a fairly balanced unit that deserves 4 stars. Now onto Tianzun's research file. He's the first teacher from Umamichi Academy that we know of and the advisor of the Asakusa Gurus. He does know Motosumi, who hates how he randomly disappears and reappears all the time. That's because Tianzun's existence is weird. He literally disappears and reappears out of existence just at seemingly random. That is due to the nature of what he represents, an infinite winding road of Tao, which is why he's infinite type and why the worlds can't contain him. His sacred artifact is that baton from his 4-star art. He can write things down as well as indicate where he's going with it. Perhaps it's just a rod, or maybe it's based on something. I wasn't able to find out anything specific. The next transient we're covering is Loki. You should already know, but he's a major god in Norse mythology. Born to Jotun, i.e. giants, and the father of Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir. He's noted in the myths, specifically the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, for being the world's biggest troll, usually being the cause of many problems. Notably, the death of the god Balder, which is most important to HOUSAMO'S interpretation. For killing Balder, Odin bound Loki to a boulder using the entrails of one of Loki's own sons. Skadi places a snake above him that's constantly dripping poison. Thankfully, his wife Sigyn holds a bowl to catch most of it. But when Sigyn leaves to empty the bowl, the poison that drips causes Loki immense pain, and his thrashing causes earthquakes. And now HOUSAMO'S choice to have Loki strapped to a stretcher makes more sense, but speaking of HOUSAMO'S choices, let's get into Loki's unit. It's 5-star, infernal attribute, and magic type, and his skills... Why does his first skill look like this? He applies immobility to himself on turns 1 through 10 alongside taunt to himself at phase start. After being hit, he applies Curse to hitting units and foes in one square alongside giving them rage. His second skill is the Specialist. On miss, he applies Null debuff to allies in one square around him, gets Reflect debuff to himself after being debuffed at 80 and an advantage against defense boosting statuses. His third skill is Lopto of Demise, or Shovel of Demise to translate to languages. He gets Tenacity to himself at 70% on turn start, up to 20 CP after being buffed, and up to 4 CP on miss at 80 and 90%. And after being hit, he has a 70% chance to apply Bind and a 30% chance to steal up to 300 HP from hitting units. Finally is Death Rattle Trickster. A fucking awesome name. He takes severely reduced damage from any infinite type enemy. Not that it matters to Oz, because it's his ability to spread debuffs that make him deadly. Whether he moves or not, he applies weakness to enemies in magic range at 80% and removes up to 20,000 HP to every enemy on the board when he leaves. Maybe I should have expected this, but Loki's unit is one of the weirdest I've ever seen. Unless you're doing dungeon quests, he just won't be able to move, like at all, and he'll only gain movement during the end of those long quests. Other than that, he's basically one of those sitting duck type units who wants to be hit, which works because he has taunt and doesn't work because he has no way to heal himself consistently, capping out at 30%. The only defense buff he gets is Tenacity, which just isn't enough. He gets 4 stars, just barely though. Onto his research file. One of the most interesting things in it is this bit right here. He's currently transferred over to the Yurakucho entertainers and bound to their custody. This implies the fact that Loki gets passed around by someone, meaning that after chapter 14 is over, Loki has a very good chance of being important again. It also notes he's to be struck down by the Avatar of Light, which could be Ahura Mazda or Lu, as in the player. His 5-star research file elaborates on the terrifying power of Loki's sacred artifact, which can decide the truth of something. It's his tongue, and the runes engraved on it can decide what the truth is to the listener. This ability has reality warping effects. His research file literally states he used it to give birth to 3 kids. It makes sense why he's constrained, since this could very easily change the whole nature of the game. Like, if they told the player they weren't the trophy or the exiles, the game would suddenly not revolve around them. That's how busted this ability is. Up next, we have Ahura Mazda. He's the world's representative of Garothman, the world Arsalan and Terramati are from. He's based on the Zoroastrian creator god of the same name, who was worshipped way back in 5022 BCE, but probably before even that. Notably, Ahura Mazda created 2 divine spirits. Spentamanu, who is all things good, truth, justice, light, the whole shebang. And Angramanu, who is lies, greed, destruction, that stuff. It's also worth noting that often Ahura Mazda and Spentamanu were equated, and that seems to be what HOUSAMO is going for. There's honestly not much for me to dive into with Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda's unit is 5 stars, world attribute, and blow type. Honestly expected it to be 1, considering he does have that giant magic stick. His first skill is Superman of Eternal Reoccurrence, giving himself evasion at phase start, protection to himself and allies in one square after attacking at 90%, and after being hit, he applies vigor to himself at 70%. The second skill is Original Supreme Judge. Whether he moves or not, he applies skill lock to enemies in thrust range at 90%. When attacking, he applies buff reversal to hit units and gains up to 100 CP to himself. The third skill is Great Pope of Fire. At phase start, he gets large burn and large conflagration advantage to himself and allies. He also gets Glint to himself and directly adjacent allies when being buffed at 60% and gives charm resistance at phase start. Finally is Doomsday Remnants. He applies Guts resistance to every enemy on the board at 90% on phase start, applies Guts to himself when attacking at 80%, and deals extra damage against all kinds of burn and conflagration. Ahura Mazda is definitely a support style unit, giving charm resistance and burn advantage to allies and Guts resistance to every enemy. He even gets great debuffs like skill lock and buff reversal, albeit in a more limited fashion. This 5-star has certainly earned 5 stars. Now onto his research file. It's very meaty, elaborating on a lot of some basic lore that we've been missing, such as the Rulemaker's Portal being in Tokyo Cathedral in the exile of Garothman, Ahriman. He believes that everyone with a body is good, so Ahriman, another name for Angramenu, who is more of a spirit, is inherently evil. As far as world reps go, Ahura Mazda is noted for being superhuman, able to withstand the reoccurring loops. It's also noted that he can win any one-on-one fight once, and he's destined to battle with anyone who self-IDs as a villain. This rings similar to how Nobumichi can beat any Hakenshi by abusing rules and roles. His sacred artifact is that big fucking stick he's carrying, which has the power to turn non-living things into light. As the ultimate arbiter, Ahura Mazda fears making a misjudgment, which is why he trains his body and mind so hard. The research file also makes mention of Azidahaka, a 3-headed dragon from an Iranian tale that I really don't have time to get into now. From my understanding of the research file, Azidahaka was kind of like what Hombre Tigre is to Tezcatlipoca, but for Ahriman. A physical shell that Ahriman could enter to interact with the physical world, and yet it would still be empty. It also mentions how he has no shame in exposing any part of himself. Combine that with the part about naturist groupings, and it reminds me of a certain scene from Zootopia. Finally is Beowulf, the limited unit of this banner. He's from the epic poem of the same name, Beowulf, and I've already covered him before, so click here for a more in-depth thing, so I'm just gonna summarize here. Beowulf kills Grendel, kills Grendel's mom, becomes king, fights a dragon to a stalemate, fights the dragon again and wins, but is mortally wounded and dies. The Beowulf we have in game is 4 stars, all-around attribute, blow type, and his skills are as follows. His first skill is Swordbreaker. On turns 1 through 6, he changes himself to Long Slash and gets crit to himself and applies Brawn at phase start. His second skill is One Who Leaves the Battlefield. At phase start, he gets Guts up to 10 CP when attacking and applies Fear to hit units in this range. Next is Viking, King of the Slayer. He deals double damage against Dragonborn enemies. Sorry, protagonist. He gets adamantine before being hit 50% of the time, and whether he moves or not, he applies burn in this range at 90%. Finally is the one who got it all. He resists stackable fatal poison, burn, freeze, countdown, stigma, and infinitude. When he leaves, he removes up to 6,000 HP to enemies in this range while giving Arger to allies in this range. Honestly, Beowulf is a pretty good unit. He deals massive damage thanks to Long Slash and crit, and once he loses that and Beowulf dies, he gives a great buff while removing a ton of HP. Put him at the front of your team so it can be most effective. He gets 5 stars. Now onto his research file. He's from the world of Yggdrasil and enjoys fighting dragons. He's destined to go down in battle against the dragon, taking the beast's life with his own. This has me worried because the protagonist is classified as a dragon, but more on that later. However, because the world of Tokyo resets so quickly in the actions of a certain theatric criminal, he's not able to reach a point of becoming king and thus never ages. The fact that he's locked outside of the regular bounds of Tokyo is why he's all-round attribute. The fact that his right arm is all furry is probably a reference to him ripping the Grendel's arm off at the shoulder. His sacred artifact is, or well, sacred artifacts are, every treasure sword you see hanging from his waist. That dragon you see in his art is Worm. It's his battle buddy and is known to make a certain transient from the Beast Tamers very jealous. The most important thing about Beowulf to know is that he's a member of the Game Masters, the administrative guild whose goal is to ensure that the game keeps going. We also learn in the chapter 14 prologue that Beowulf has been tasked with killing the protagonist. While Beowulf is guaranteed to die fighting a dragon, he's also guaranteed to kill the dragon in a double KO, which has me worried since the protagonist is technically a dragon. Back to the part I mentioned but set aside a little while ago, this chapter seems to be focused on the way rules and roles affect outcomes. Noble Michi can't lose a fight against any Akenchi, Ahura can win any one-on-one fight, and he's destined to fight all of those who self-identify as villains. And Beowulf is destined to always get a double KO against the dragon. Given how the protagonist no longer has double dragons, they have no way to escape these ironclad functions of Tokyo. Frankly, the only hope they have is to either get the ring back and double dragon along with it, or use Loki, whose tongue is noted to be able to warp reality. Either way, we'll see how things turn out in chapter 14, won't we? When it gets translated in about a bajillion years. The translation might take a while, but these Patreon shoutouts sure won't. For our 3 stars, we have special thanks to 87 Werehog, Deku, Zora Chow, Choron, Garon Lefay, Dragon King Yara, Anon RC, Lightning Shadow, and Kayun. For 4 stars, we have Miki Moon, the Viking Boy. For our Super D-Tuber special 5-star shoutouts, we have... First, Vanilla Flower, the party-going ethics teacher. Then, Poor Mage, the theatrical criminal. Next, Sky King 64, the Super Pope. Finally, Mahagasaur, the Double Dragon KO.